The lights outside the Shrine Auditorium burned white-hot against the Los Angeles sky, turning the evening air electric with anticipation. Camera flashes popped in rapid succession, a strobing rhythm that matched the pulse of thousands of fans pressed against the barricades, their voices rising and falling in waves of excitement each time a limousine door opened. Somewhere beyond the velvet ropes, a brass band warmed up inside the auditorium, the faint sound of a trumpet scale drifting out into the cooling evening air, mixing with the exhaust of idling town cars and the sharp perfume of 100 different colognes. It was the night of the Academy of Country Music's 50th anniversary special, and George Strait was set to receive the Lifetime Achievement Award, a night decades in the making, a night the entire genre had been waiting for. Inside a private green room 3 floors above the chaos, the air smelled faintly of hairspray and steamed fabric, the kind of manufactured calm that always preceded these events. George stood in front of a mirror adjusting his cream-colored Resistal hat, the same brand he'd worn since his first record deal back in the late 70s, tilting it just slightly, the way he always did, out of habit more than vanity. His reflection showed a man who had earned every line on his face, 60 years of stages, dust roads, and Texas summers etched into his features. A face that had graced more magazine covers than he could remember, but had never quite lost the weathered honesty of a man who'd once mended fences for a living. He looked calm the way he always did before a show, but underneath the practiced stillness something in his chest felt tight, a low hum of unease he couldn't quite place, the kind of feeling old ranch hands used to call a change in the wind. 5 minutes, Mr. Strait, said a voice through the door, muffled by the thick soundproofing of the green room walls. It belonged to Derek Callahan, his longtime tour manager, and one of the few people who'd been with him since the early Ace and the whole band days. Back when tour buses broke down more often than they ran, and every gig paid just enough to cover gas to the next one. Derek poked his head in, phone in hand, scrolling through the show's rundown with the practiced urgency of a man who'd managed 1,000 nights like this one. They want you on the carpet in 5, then straight to your seat. Reba's already out there working the press line like a pro. It's a madhouse. Bigger crowd than the Grammys, if you can believe that. George nodded, reaching for his phone on the counter, more out of habit than need. He rarely checked it before a show, preferring instead to keep his mind settled, focused on the moment ahead rather than scattered across a dozen digital conversations. But something made him glance at the screen this time, some quiet instinct honed over decades of paying attention to the small signs most people rushed past. And what he saw stopped him cold. 12 missed calls, all from the same number, Ruth Weller. He hadn't heard that name light up his screen in almost 4 years. Not since her father, Harold Weller, had stopped calling to check in on him the way he used to every few months, just to hear how the boy he'd once given a job to was doing. Those calls had always come at unpredictable hours, sometimes early morning, sometimes late at night, Harold never much caring about time zones or convenience, just picking up the phone when the notion struck him. George's thumb hovered over the screen before he pressed to call back, his heart already sinking with the kind of dread that comes from knowing. Somehow, before you're even told, the way a rancher knows a storm is coming before the first cloud appears on the horizon. Ruth answered on the second ring, her voice cracking before she even got a full sentence out. Background noise suggesting she was standing in a hospital corridor, hurried footsteps, and a distant intercom announcement bleeding through the connection. George, it's Dad. He collapsed this afternoon, out by the barn. They're saying it's his heart, real bad this time. He's at Palo Pinto Regional, and George, the doctor said he might not make it through the night. The words landed like a physical blow. George gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles going white, his mind rushing back 43 years to a hot afternoon on a ranch outside Mineral Wells, Texas, where a 19-year-old kid with more dreams than sense had been given a job, a place to sleep, and more importantly, a reason to believe he was worth something. He could almost smell it now, standing in this sterile, air-conditioned green room 3,000 miles away, hay dust, and diesel fuel. Sun-baked leather, the particular sweetness of Texas summer grass. "Ruth," George said, his voice steadier than he felt, though his free hand had begun to tremble slightly against the counter's edge. "I'm coming. Right now. Just hold on. Tell him to hold on." "George, you've got the award show tonight. I saw it on the news. I wasn't even going to call. I know how big this is for you, but Dad, he's been asking for you. He keeps saying your name, even when he's barely conscious. The nurses say it's the only word he's said clearly all evening." George closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of two worlds pulling in opposite directions. The roaring crowd downstairs waiting for a legend to walk the carpet. 16 million people about to tune in on television. Decades of career milestones converging into a single glittering night. And on the other end of a phone line, a dying man 3 states away, who had once been the only person to tell him he could be somebody, back when nobody else in Nashville would even return his calls. "I made him a promise a long time ago," George said quietly, opening his eyes to find his own reflection staring back at him in the mirror, hat slightly askew, eyes suddenly older than they'd looked just minutes before. "I'm not about to break it now because of some award. Tell him I'm coming, Ruth. Tell him to fight. Tell him I said to hold on just a little while longer." He hung up and turned to find Derek standing frozen in the doorway. Having heard enough of the conversation to understand something had shifted seriously, his earlier easy confidence replaced by visible concern. "George, what's going on? You're white as a sheet. Who is that? I need a car," George said, already pulling off his jacket and reaching for the leather one he'd worn on the flight in, the familiar weight of it settling onto his shoulders like armor. Not a car to the carpet. "A car to the airport. Private strip if we can get one fast enough. Whatever's closest to Mineral Wells." Derek's expression twisted with confusion. Then alarm, his phone still glowing in his hand with the show's countdown timer ticking steadily downward. "George, you're on in 4 minutes. There are 300 photographers out there, cameras from every major network. The producers are gonna have a stroke." Reba's already announcing the award category. "This is live television, George. There's no pause button on this." "Derek." George's voice was calm, but final. The same tone he used to end an argument with a band member who wasn't reading the room. A tone that had settled disputes on tour buses and in studio booths for over 4 decades. "Harold Weller is dying. You remember Harold, the man who gave me a roof and a paycheck when nobody in Nashville would return my calls, who saw something in a broke kid nobody else bothered looking twice at. I'm not walking a red carpet while he's fighting for his life in a hospital bed in Texas. Get me a car." For a long moment, Derek didn't move, torn between decades of professional instinct screaming at him to stop this and the deeper knowledge of exactly who Harold Weller was to George. A fact he'd only heard mentioned a handful of times over the years, always in a hushed, reverent tone reserved for something sacred. Derek had never met the man, had only pieced together fragments of the story from George's rare, brief mentions, but he understood in that instant, watching the resolve harden in his friend's eyes, that this wasn't a request. It was a man choosing who he was going to be, in front of the one person who mattered enough to witness it. "I'll get you a car," Derek said, finally, already dialing, his thumb moving across the screen with practiced efficiency even as his mind raced through the logistical avalanche about to follow. "But George, you understand what this is going to look like on every entertainment channel by morning. This is going to be a story whether you want it to be or not." "Let it look like whatever it wants," George said, shrugging his jacket on fully now, adjusting his hat one final time in the mirror, not out of vanity this time, but out of habit, a small ritual of readiness before stepping into whatever came next. "And there are things more important than how something looks, Derek. I learned that lesson a long time ago, on a ranch you've never seen, from a man most of the world's never heard of. Time I proved I still remember it." Downstairs, the scene was unraveling in real time, the carefully choreographed machinery of live television beginning to grind against an unexpected obstacle. Producers, publicists, and network executives scrambled through hallways lined with framed photographs of past award winners, their footsteps echoing against polished floors as word filtered down that the night's biggest honoree was nowhere to be found. Melissa Grant, the show's executive producer, stood backstage gripping her headset like a lifeline, sweat beading at her temple despite the air conditioning blasting through the venue, her eyes darting between 3 different monitors showing camera feeds from every angle of the building. "Someone find him," she snapped into her mic, her voice sharp with the particular panic of someone who'd built her entire career on flawless execution. "We're live in 90 seconds, and Reba's about to introduce a category with no honoree standing by. This cannot happen. Check every green room, check the parking garage, check the men's room if you have to." Out front, on the red carpet itself, the crowd noise had reached a fever pitch. Thousands of voices blending into a single roaring wave of anticipation. Fans had been camping outside the shrine since early morning, some holding handmade signs with lyrics from Georgia's biggest hits, Amarillo by Morning. "Check yes or no the chair," others simply chanting his name in anticipation, their voices carrying over the low murmur of idling limousines and the constant clicking of camera shutters. Entertainment reporters stood poised with microphones, narrating every arrival with practiced enthusiasm, their earpieces crackling with directions from producers scrambling behind the scenes. "Has anyone actually seen him tonight?" asked Brianna Cole, a correspondent for a national entertainment network, turning to her camera operator with visible concern, her professional smile flickering for just a moment before she caught herself. "We were told he landed in LA this afternoon." Something feels off. Normally he's one of the most punctual guys on this carpet. Inside, Derek moved through the back corridors of the shrine with George close behind him, both men bypassing the main lobby entirely, slipping through a service exit usually reserved for equipment, trucks, and catering staff, past stacks of folded tablecloths and coiled extension cords. A black SUV idled at the curb, engine running, exhaust curling faintly into the cool night air, driven by a man named Patrick Doyle, one of the few security personnel who'd worked with George long enough to know when not to ask questions, his expression unreadable as he held the door open. "Airport," Derek said, sliding into the passenger seat as George climbed into the back, the leather seat still warm from the evening heat. "Private terminal, the one we used flying in. And step on it, we don't have a lot of runway on this." As the SUV pulled away from the glittering chaos of the shrine, its tires whispering against asphalt still radiating the day's heat, George looked out the tinted window at the lights fading behind him, the roar of the crowd growing distant, swallowed up by the city's endless hum. He thought of Harold's voice, rougher now than it used to be, but still carrying that same steady Texas patience that had once talked a scared, broke kid out of quitting music for good. He thought of a dusty porch, sweet tea in mason jars sweating condensation in the summer heat, and a promise made under a sky full of stars that had nothing to do with fame and everything to do with character. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Derek's assistant, texting frantically. "Producers are asking where you are. Press is starting to notice." "What do I tell them?" George didn't answer immediately. He stared at the message for a long moment, the glow of the screen illuminating his face in the darkened back seat, then typed back 4 words that would soon spread across every entertainment outlet in the country. "Tell them I had somewhere I needed to be." The SUV merged onto the freeway, leaving behind the red carpet, the cameras, the trophy waiting under his name, and carrying him instead toward a hospital room in rural Texas, where an old rancher lay fighting for every breath, holding on just to see if the promise made to him decades ago still meant something. Behind them, at the Shrine Auditorium, Reba McEntire stood on stage in front of a packed house and 16 million television viewers, holding a golden trophy meant for a man who was no longer in the building. Her expression, a careful mask of professional grace over what was clearly genuine surprise. "Well," she said into the microphone, her Oklahoma drawl steady despite the visible confusion rippling through the crew just off camera. Stagehands exchanging nervous glances in the wings. Seems our next honoree stepped out for a minute. Knowing George the way I do, I'd bet whatever pulled him away mattered a whole lot more than this shiny thing I'm holding. The audience laughed nervously, unsure whether to be amused or alarmed, the sound rippling awkwardly through the auditorium. Backstage, Melissa Grant buried her face in her hands, already bracing for the storm of headlines that would break within the hour. Her phone already lighting up with calls from network executives demanding answers she didn't have. None of them yet understood the full weight of what was happening, that somewhere over the Mojave Desert, at 38,000 feet, a country music legend was flying toward the one thing that had never appeared on any award show stage. An old debt of gratitude and a promise he intended to keep no matter what it cost him. The chartered plane cut through clear night sky, its cabin quiet except for the low hum of engines and the occasional creak of settling metal. The kind of sound that always reminded George of long overnight drives on tour buses decades earlier, rattling down empty highways toward the next town. He sat by the window, elbow propped against the frame, watching the lights of small Texas towns scatter beneath him like fallen stars, clusters of amber and white marking towns he'd played in decades ago, back when his name meant nothing on a marquee. Derek sat across the narrow aisle, phone buzzing incessantly in his hand, each notification a fresh headline forming in real time, the glow of the screen throwing pale light across his tired face. "They're already running with it," Derek said, scrolling through his screen with a grimace, thumbs swiping past headline after headline. George Strait vanishes before Lifetime Achievement Award. Country legend No show sparks speculation. One outlet's already asking if you're having health problems. Another speculating you had some kind of falling out with the Academy. "Let them speculate," George said without turning from the window, his breath fogging faintly against the cool glass. "They'll know the truth soon enough, and it won't be nearly as dramatic as they're imagining." Derek studied his friend for a long moment, weighing whether now was the time to ask the question that had been sitting on his tongue since the SUV pulled away from the shrine. The cabin lights had been dimmed for the overnight flight, casting everything in a soft amber glow that made the moment feel almost confessional, a private in a way rare for two men who spent most of their lives surrounded by crews, handlers, and cameras. "George, who exactly is Harold Weller? You've mentioned him maybe 3 times in 20 years, and each time it was like you were talking about someone sacred. What happened out there in Mineral Wells?" George exhaled slowly, his breath fogging faintly against the cool cabin window before dissipating. He hadn't told this story in years, not fully, not the way it deserved to be told. But something about the moment, the distance from the glittering artificiality of Hollywood, the quiet hum of the plane carrying him toward Texas soil, the darkness pressing close against the small oval window, made him want to say it out loud. Finally, after decades of keeping it folded away like an old photograph. "It was 1983, George began, his voice settling into the low, measured cadence of a man revisiting old ground, each word chosen carefully, as if handling something fragile. "I was 29 years old, married, with a little money saved from playing bars around San Marcos, but nothing steady. Nashville had turned me down twice already. Everybody kept telling me my sound was too traditional, that country radio wanted something slicker, something more polished. I was about ready to give up and go work construction full-time, just to keep food on the table for my wife." "I didn't know that," Derek said quietly, setting his phone face down on the armrest, giving George his full attention now. "I always figured you went from bar gigs straight to a record deal. That's the story everybody tells." "Everybody figures that," George said, a faint, tired smile crossing his face, the corners of his eyes crinkling with something between amusement and old pain. "But there was a stretch, almost 8 months, where I was flat broke, staying with my wife's cousin outside Mineral Wells, taking whatever work I could find. That's how I met Harold. He owned about 400 acres of ranch land, cattle mostly, a little hay on the side. He needed help mending fences and hauling feed, and I needed a paycheck bad enough not to care that it barely covered gas money for the truck. The plane dipped slightly as it adjusted altitude, and George glanced instinctively toward the cockpit before continuing, the momentary shift in cabin pressure settling as quickly as it had come. Harold was maybe 50 then, gruff as a mule but fair, the kind of man who'd tell you exactly what he thought whether you wanted to hear it or not. Never talked much unless he had something worth saying. One evening, maybe 3 months into working for him, I was sitting on a hay bale after finishing chores, playing my guitar just to clear my head. Didn't even realize he was standing behind me listening, boots quiet against the dirt. When I finished the song, he just said, "Boy, why in the hell are you out here shoveling cow feed when you can sing like that?" Derek leaned forward, phone forgotten in his lap entirely now, fully absorbed. "What did you tell him?" I told him the truth. That Nashville didn't want traditional country. That I'd been turned down more times than I could count. That maybe it just wasn't in the cards for me. That maybe some dreams just weren't meant for certain people. And Harold, he looked at me dead serious, arms crossed over his chest, and said something I've never forgotten. He said, "Son, the world's full of people who quit one door before the right one opens. You keep at this, and someday, when you've made it, you remember where you came from. Don't let the shine of it all make you forget the folks who believed in you when you had nothing." George paused, watching the memory play out against the dark glass of the window, the reflection of his own face superimposed faintly over the passing darkness below. I told him I promised I wouldn't, and I meant it. 2 months later, I scraped together enough to make one more trip to Nashville, and that time a producer named Blake Norwood, nobody big, just a session guy with connections, heard a demo I'd cut and got it in front of the right ears. Everything changed after that. But Harold never let me forget the promise. Every few years he'd call not to ask for money or favors, just to check if I still remembered who I was before the fame. Derek sat back, absorbing the weight of the story, the cabin quiet around them except for the steady hum of the engines. And now he's dying. George finished quietly, the word landing heavier than he expected, even as he said it himself. And I'll be damned if the last thing I ever do is let him think that promise didn't mean anything, just because I got busy accepting some trophy in a room full of people who'll forget my name the second somebody younger walks in. Back in Los Angeles, the fallout from George's disappearance had exploded far beyond anything the show's producers anticipated. Melissa Grant paced backstage, phone pressed to her ear, listening to the network's head of programming demand an explanation she didn't have, her heels clicking sharply against the concrete floor with each turn. Reporters camped outside the shrine buzzed with theories ranging from health emergencies to career burnout, none of them close to the truth. Their speculation spreading faster across social media than any official statement could hope to catch up with. Inside a nearby green room, George's publicist, Victoria Lang, sat with her laptop open, scanning the wreckage of social media commentary, her coffee long gone cold beside her keyboard. Hashtags trended within the hour, some supportive, assuming something serious must have happened to pull him away. Others cynical, painting it as a diva moment unbefitting a man of his stature and decades of professionalism. "I need something to tell them," Victoria said into her phone, pacing the small room, her free hand pressed against her temple. "Derek, please, just give me a sentence I can release, anything. The silence is making this 10 times worse than it needs to be. Every minute we don't say anything, they write the story for us." On the plane, Derek glanced at George, who had grown quiet again, staring out at the darkened Texas landscape rolling beneath them, thin clouds catching moonlight in silver streaks far below. "Victoria wants a statement," Derek said gently. "Just something simple, to stop the bleeding before it gets worse." George considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Tell her this, George Strait left tonight to be with a dear friend and mentor during a medical emergency. He asks for privacy and prayers for the Weller family during this difficult time. That's all, nothing more. Derek relayed the message, thumbs moving quickly across his phone screen, and within 20 minutes, it hit every major entertainment outlet simultaneously. The tone of coverage shifted almost instantly, speculation of scandal or health crises giving way to a wave of public sympathy and curiosity about the mysterious dear friend and mentor, important enough to pull a legend away from his own crowning achievement. But not everyone in George's orbit reacted with understanding. Back at his management company's Nashville office, a young rising executive named Bradley Foster, recently promoted to oversee George's brand partnerships, watched the unfolding story with visible frustration from his home office. 3 empty coffee cups lined up beside his laptop. Bradley had spent the better part of 18 months negotiating a lucrative sponsorship deal contingent on tonight's high-profile appearance, and George's abrupt disappearance threatened to unravel months of careful positioning. Spreadsheets of projected returns now feeling suddenly worthless. "This is a disaster," Bradley muttered to himself, drafting a furious email to Derek that he'd delete twice before finally sending a toned-down version, his fingers hovering over the keyboard each time before pulling back. He didn't understand, not yet, what kind of debt could possibly outweigh the calculated machinery of a career built over 5 decades. To Bradley, loyalty was a marketing angle, a talking point for press releases, not a lived commitment that could append an entire evening's carefully constructed plans. That gap in understanding would soon put him directly at odds with George, setting up a confrontation neither man could yet see coming. As the plane began its descent toward a small regional airport outside Mineral Wells, the cabin lights flickering briefly as the aircraft adjusted for landing, George felt the old, familiar pull of Texas soil beneath the clouds' dry summer air, wide open sky, and land that had shaped him long before any stage or spotlight ever had. Derek watched him quietly, understanding now that this wasn't just about visiting a sick friend. This was about a man returning to the exact place where his character had been built, at the exact moment that character was being tested by the glittering, unforgiving world he'd left behind. "We're about 20 minutes out from the hospital once we land," Derek said, checking the flight tracker on his phone, the small map showing their position steadily approaching a cluster of runway lights. "Ruth said she'd have someone waiting for us at the airstrip." George nodded, jaw tightening as the plane dipped lower, runway lights beginning to flicker into view below like scattered embers against the dark landscape. Whatever waited for him at Palo Pinto Regional Hospital. He understood one thing with absolute clarity: some promises weren't meant to be kept only when convenient. They were meant to be kept, especially when it cost you something. And tonight, it was costing him everything Hollywood thought mattered. The wheels touched down on Texas's ground just after midnight, the plane's tires screeching softly against the tarmac before settling into a smooth taxi. And as the cabin door opened, George stepped out into warm, humid air thick with the smell of cut hay and distant cattle, a smell that instantly carried him back 43 years, to a hay bale, a guitar, and a promise that had shaped the entire course of his life. A weathered pickup truck waited at the edge of the tarmac, headlights cutting through the darkness, engine idling with a low rumble. Standing beside it was a woman in her early 50s, arms crossed tightly against the night chill, her face etched with exhaustion and worry, her cardigan pulled close around her shoulders despite the warm air. Ruth Weller had been crying, that much was obvious, mascara slightly smudged beneath her eyes, but she straightened as George approached, relief and gratitude flooding her expression. "You came," she said, voice breaking, taking an unsteady step toward him. "I didn't think with everything happening tonight, I thought maybe." "Ruth," George said, closing the distance between them and pulling her into a firm, steadying embrace, the kind of hug that carried decades of shared history, even between two people who hadn't seen each other in years. There was never a question. "How is he?" Ruth pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, sniffling once before composing herself enough to speak clearly. Stable for now, but the doctors aren't optimistic. His heart's been failing for months, and tonight it just gave out more than usual. He keeps drifting in and out, but every time he wakes up he asks if you're coming. George felt his chest tighten again. The same ache from earlier, now sharpened by proximity to the truth, standing on the very kind of tarmac where his career had first taken flight decades ago. "Take me to him," he said quietly. "Right now." As Ruth led him toward the truck, gravel crunching beneath their boots, Derek lingered by the plane for a moment, watching the scene unfold with a growing understanding of just how much this single night was about to reshape everything. Not just Georgia's public image, but the deeper questions about legacy, loyalty, and what truly mattered when the cameras finally stopped rolling. Somewhere behind them, back in Los Angeles, a trophy sat unclaimed on an empty stage, and a room full of powerful people were only just beginning to understand that George Strait had made his choice, and it wasn't going to be an easy one to explain away, especially not to the people counting on tonight going exactly as planned. The truck's engine roared to life, tires crunching against gravel as it pulled away from the airstrip, carrying George deeper into the Texas night, toward a hospital room where an old man's final wish waited to be fulfilled, and toward a reckoning that would test everything George Strait believed about the cost and the worth of keeping his word. The pickup truck rattled along a two-lane county road, headlights slicing through darkness broken only by the occasional porch light of a distant farmhouse. The cab filled with the low rumble of the engine and the faint creak of worn shocks over uneven pavement. George sat in the passenger seat, watching the familiar shapes of mesquite trees and barbed wire fences roll past, silhouettes against a moonlit sky, each mile pulling him deeper into a version of Texas that television specials and stadium tours had never managed to erase from his memory. The smell of the truck's cab, old vinyl, faint diesel, a hint of hay dust embedded permanently in the upholstery, carried him backward through decades in a way no photograph ever could. Ruth drove in silence for a while, her hands tight on the wheel, knuckles pale even in the dim glow of the dashboard lights, before finally speaking. "He talks about you more than you'd think," she said, eyes fixed on the road, voice carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who'd spent the entire day and night in a state of suspended dread, not in a bragging way, just stories. The time you fixed the north fence in a thunderstorm because you were too stubborn to wait it out. The way you used to hum while you worked, like the songs just lived in you and had to come out somehow, whether you meant for them to or not. George managed a faint smile despite the knot in his stomach, the memories surfacing vividly, rain hammering against his shoulders, lightning splitting the sky, heralds shouting instructions over the storm. I remember that fence. Lightning struck close enough I felt it in my teeth. Your daddy still made me finish the job. That sounds like him, Ruth said, a small, tired laugh escaping despite everything, the sound breaking slightly at the edges. He always said, hard work builds character faster than comfort does. Said comfort makes a man forget what he's capable of. The truck slowed as they turned onto the hospital's access road, gravel giving way to cracked asphalt. A modest two-story building that looked more like a converted school than a medical center coming into view. The kind of rural facility built to serve ranchers and farmers scattered across hundreds of square miles, not celebrities flying in on private jets. Its windows glowed with the sterile fluorescence common to hospitals everywhere, a stark contrast to the deep darkness of the surrounding countryside. George felt strangely comforted by its plainness. This was Harold's world, unpolished and honest, exactly as he remembered it, untouched by the manufactured glamour he'd left behind in Los Angeles. Inside, the fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor buzzed faintly overhead, the antiseptic smell sharp and clinical, as Ruth led George past a nurse's station, where a tired-looking nurse glanced up briefly before returning to her charts. A man in his early 30s stood near the door of Harold's room, arms crossed, wearing the kind of exhausted expression that comes from too many hours in uncomfortable waiting room chairs. A half-empty coffee cup abandoned on a nearby table. He straightened when he saw George approaching, his posture shifting from weary slouch to something more guarded. "George, this is my son, Caleb," Ruth said, gesturing between them. "Caleb, this is—" "I know who he is, Mom," Caleb said, though his tone carried more complexity than simple recognition, a flicker of something unresolved beneath the surface politeness. He extended a hand, firm but guarded, his grip brief and businesslike. "Thanks for coming. Grandpa's been asking for you since this afternoon." There was something unresolved in Caleb's expression, something George couldn't quite place yet, a tension that seemed to run deeper than simple worry over his grandfather's condition. But Ruth pushed open the door before George could dwell on it, and the moment dissolved into the quiet, sterile hum of the ICU room beyond. Harold Weller lay in the hospital bed, tubes and monitors surrounding him like a strange electronic garden, wires trailing to machines that beeped in soft, steady intervals, his once broad frame diminished by age and illness. His eyes were closed, chest rising and falling with the labored rhythm of a heart working far harder than it should have to. Each breath visible in the slight tremor of the blanket covering him. George felt the years collapse in an instant, the image before him a stark, painful contrast to the vigorous rancher who'd once hauled hay bales without breaking a sweat, who'd taught a broke young musician how to mend fences, and without either of them realizing it at the time, how to mend a life. "Harold," George said softly, pulling a chair beside the bed and taking the old man's weathered hand in his own, the skin thin and paper dry beneath his fingers, marked with decades of sun and hard work. "It's George. I'm here." For a long moment, nothing happened, only the steady beep of the heart monitor filling the silence. Then Harold's eyelids fluttered, slowly opening, unfocused at first before settling on George's face, recognition dawning slowly like sunrise breaking over flat Texas plains. A faint, crooked smile broke across his lips, the same stubborn defiance George remembered from decades ago. "Took you long enough," Harold rasped, voice thin but unmistakably his, carrying the same dry humor that had defined him for as long as George had known him. "Heard you had some fancy award thing tonight." "Had somewhere more important to be," George said, throat tightening, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Told you," Harold whispered, each word costing him visible effort. "The world's full of people who forget where they came from. Proud you ain't one of them." The monitors beeped steadily in the background as George held tight to Harold's hand, the weight of 4 decades pressing down on the small hospital room, the fluorescent lights casting everything in a pale, clinical glow that felt entirely at odds with the warmth of the moment passing between them. Behind him, Ruth wiped tears from her cheeks, her shoulders trembling slightly, and Caleb stood near the doorway, his earlier guardedness softening slightly at the raw sincerity of the moment, though something still lingered behind his eyes. A tension George would soon come to understand went far beyond simple family grief. Outside the room, Caleb pulled Ruth aside while George remained with Harold, voices low but strained, echoing faintly against the empty corridor walls. "Mom, we need to talk about the ranch," Caleb said, glancing anxiously toward the closed door as if worried the conversation might carry through. "The bank's been calling all week. If we don't figure something out by the end of the month, they're going to foreclose. Grandpa doesn't even know how bad it's gotten." Ruth's face crumpled with fresh worry, her hand pressing against her chest as if to physically hold herself together. "Caleb, please, not tonight. Your grandfather is fighting for his life in there." "I know," Caleb said, frustration mixing with guilt in his voice, his hands running through his hair in a gesture of barely contained desperation. "But if he doesn't make it, and the ranch is gone too, that's everything, Mom. That's 100 years of Weller land. Gone because we couldn't keep up with the note after the drought wiped out 2 seasons of cattle. Everything Grandpa built, just gone." The financial strain hung heavy in the hallway air, an unspoken crisis that had been building long before tonight's medical emergency. one that would soon collide directly with George's own unfolding dilemma in ways none of them yet anticipated. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered almost imperceptibly, and somewhere down the hall, a cartwheel squeaked against tile. Mundane hospital sounds that felt strangely out of place against the weight of what was being discussed. Back inside the room, Harold's grip on George's hand tightened weakly as he fought to stay lucid, his eyes narrowing slightly with the effort of concentration. "George," he said, "I need you to know something. Been carrying a guilt all these years, and figured tonight might be my last chance to say it." "Harold, you don't owe me any confessions," George said gently, leaning closer to catch every word. "No," Harold insisted, shaking his head slightly against the pillow, the motion small but deliberate. "Let me finish. That producer, Blake Norwood, the one who got your demo heard, I called in a favor to get him to listen. Wasn't luck that got you discovered, son. Was me pulling a string I had no business pulling, calling an old army buddy who happened to work in the business?" George stared at him, stunned silence filling the room as decades of assumed history rearranged themselves in an instant. The steady beep of the heart monitor, suddenly the only sound in a world gone quiet with revelation. "Harold, why didn't you ever tell me?" "Didn't want you thinking your talent wasn't real," Harold said, breath growing shallower, each word requiring visible effort now. "It was real. Still is. I just gave it a door to walk through is all. Wanted you to walk through it believing in yourself, not owing me for it." The revelation hit George like a physical weight, reshaping the entire narrative of his own rise to fame, a story he'd told himself for over 40 years, now revealed to have an entirely different foundation of quiet, selfless generosity behind it. He thought of every award, every sold-out arena, every platinum record, all of it tracing back not just to talent and timing, but to one man's deliberate, humble act of faith in a broke kid mending fences on his ranch. A debt so foundational, George had never even known to name it properly until this exact moment. "You gave me my whole life," George said finally, voice breaking, his composure cracking for the first time since he'd stepped off the plane, "and you never asked for anything back." "Didn't need anything back," Harold whispered, eyes growing heavier, his hand loosening slightly in George's grip. "Just needed you to remember, and you did. That's enough for any man." The heart monitor's steady beeping suddenly faltered, an irregular rhythm cutting through the quiet room like a warning siren. And within seconds, nurses rushed in, pushing George gently but firmly aside as Harold's condition took a sharp, frightening turn. Ruth cried out from the doorway, Caleb rushing to her side to steady her. As medical staff worked urgently around the bed, machines beeping in escalating alarm, voices calling out numbers and instructions in the clipped, urgent shorthand of emergency medicine. George stood back against the wall, heart pounding, watching the culmination of every choice that had brought him to this exact moment. The abandoned red carpet, the unclaimed trophy, the entire architecture of his public life suddenly rendered meaningless against the fragile, flickering reality of a dying man's heartbeat. Meanwhile, back in Los Angeles, the story had fully ignited across every major entertainment platform. Bradley Foster sat in his hotel room well past midnight, laptop open, drafting increasingly desperate messages to Derek, demanding a fuller explanation before the sponsorship partners who'd specifically requested tonight's red carpet appearance as part of their activation strategy pulled out entirely, his screen a chaotic patchwork of open browser tabs and unread emails. "This isn't just bad optics," Bradley typed furiously, fingers striking the keys harder than necessary. "This is a 7-figure deal unraveling in real time because George decided some personal matter was more important than the commitments this team spent a year building. I need him back in LA within 48 hours, or I need to know exactly what's going on so I can manage this properly." Derek, exhausted and increasingly protective of George's decision, finally called Bradley directly rather than continuing the email exchange. stepping into the hospital's empty visitor lounge for privacy. "Bradley, listen to me. There's a man dying in a Texas hospital right now who gave George his entire career before any of us were even born. George isn't managing optics tonight. He's managing his conscience. If that costs the sponsorship, then it costs the sponsorship." "That's easy for you to say," Bradley shot back, his voice tight with frustration. "You're not the one who has to explain to the board why we lost a deal this size." "No," Derek said evenly, "but I'm the one who's known George long enough to understand that some things matter more than deals, Bradley. You'll learn that eventually, or you won't last long in this business." The call ended tersely, leaving both men on opposite sides of a divide that was only just beginning to widen, one rooted in old-fashioned loyalty, the other in the unforgiving calculus of modern celebrity management. That divide would grow sharper still over the coming day, as consequences from Georgia's absence rippled outward, forcing a reckoning neither Bradley nor the sponsorship partners were prepared to accept quietly. Back in the Texas hospital room, after several tense minutes that felt to George like hours, the medical team finally stabilized Harold's heart rhythm, the frantic beeping settling gradually back into a steadier, more measured pattern. The doctor's expression as she stepped into the hallway to speak with Ruth and George carried little reassurance, her scrub still slightly disheveled from the urgency of the moment. "He's stable for now," Dr. Patricia Hensley said quietly, removing her glasses briefly to rub the bridge of her nose. "But I won't sugarcoat this. His heart is failing, and every episode like this weakens him further. I'd encourage you to use whatever time you have left with him wisely. I can't promise how many more hours or days we're working with here." The words settled over the small group like a physical weight, the corridor's fluorescent lights suddenly feeling harsher, more unforgiving than before. George felt the full gravity of the choice he'd made hours earlier crystallize into something undeniable. He hadn't just missed an awards ceremony. He had chosen to spend what might be the final hours of Harold Weller's life honoring a debt that Hollywood would never understand, but that George now knew, more clearly than ever, had shaped every single thing he'd ever become. Dawn broke slowly over Palo Pinto County, pale gold light stretching across dry pastureland visible through the hospital room's narrow window. The kind of light that turned dust motes floating in the air into tiny drifting sparks. A rooster crowed somewhere in the distance, faint but unmistakable, carrying across fields still damp with early morning dew. George hadn't slept, hadn't even considered it, choosing instead to remain in the chair beside Harold's bed through the long hours of the night, occasionally dozing, but mostly watching the old man's chest rise and fall, silently willing each breath to continue, counting the intervals between them, the way he used to count measures in a song. Ruth had gone home briefly to shower and check on things, leaving Caleb to keep George company in the hallway during a rare quiet moment, both men nursing cups of vending machine coffee that had long since gone lukewarm. The younger man leaned against the wall, arms crossed, studying George with an expression that finally broke into words, his voice carrying the particular rawness of someone who hadn't slept properly in days. "Can I ask you something?" Caleb said. "And I don't mean this as disrespectful, but was it really worth it walking out on that award show? I saw the coverage on my phone last night. People are saying some pretty harsh things. Somebody even called you unprofessional." George considered the question carefully before answering, setting his own coffee cup down on the windowsill, the paper cup leaving a faint ring of condensation. "Caleb, I've won more awards than I can count. Got shelves full of trophies back home collecting dust. Some of them I couldn't even tell you where they came from without checking the little plaque. None of them ever kept me warm on a cold night or told me the truth when I needed to hear it, or believed in me when I had absolutely nothing to show for myself. Your grandfather did all three, so yeah, it was worth it, every bit." Caleb absorbed this for a moment, his jaw working slightly as he processed it, then exhaled a long breath, clearly wrestling with something deeper than simple gratitude. "It's just, we're about to lose the ranch, George. bank's calling in the note at the end of the month, and there's nothing left to sell that would cover it. Grandpa poured his whole life into that land, and now he's dying without even knowing it might not outlast him by more than a few weeks. Feels like everything he built is just evaporating no matter what any of us do. I've run the numbers 100 different ways. There's no version where we keep it without a miracle. The confession hung in the air, raw and unguarded. Morning light now fully filling the corridor with a warmth that felt strangely at odds with the weight of what Caleb had just admitted. George felt something shift inside him, a recognition that the debt he owed. Harold wasn't only about honoring a promise made decades ago in a moment of desperation, but about honoring everything Harold represented now in the final chapter of his life. "How much are we talking about?" George asked quietly. Caleb hesitated, shifting his weight, clearly uncomfortable discussing finances with a man whose net worth likely exceeded the entire county's property values combined. "It's around $340,000, including back payments and fees. I know that's probably nothing to you, but for us, it's everything. It's 4 generations of Wellers on that land." George nodded slowly, already turning the number over in his mind. Though his expression remained carefully neutral, the practiced stillness of a man who'd learned long ago not to let his face give away decisions still forming. "Let me think on that," he said. "Right now, let's focus on your grandfather." Back in Los Angeles, the fallout had metastasized into a full-blown industry crisis. Bradley Foster arrived at the management company's temporary LA office early that morning, having barely slept, clutching a printed stack of headlines that painted an increasingly complicated picture of George's absence. His tie slightly askew, dark circles visible beneath his eyes. Some outlets had shifted towards sympathy, praising the mystery family emergency, while others continued speculating about health problems, career burnout, or even rumors of a hidden feud with the show's producers. Victoria Lang met him in the conference room, looking equally drained. A laptop and 3 phones spread across the table in front of her, like the command center of a small war room. "The sponsorship team wants a call this afternoon," she said, sliding into a chair across from him. "They're spooked." Their entire campaign was built around George's red carpet appearance and acceptance speech footage. Without it, they're questioning whether the partnership still makes sense. "I told Derek this would happen," Bradley said, frustration bleeding into his voice, his hands slapping lightly against the stack of papers. "This industry runs on visibility and reliability, and last night George proved himself unreliable in front of 16 million viewers." Victoria's expression hardened slightly, her eyes narrowing with the particular sharpness of someone who'd spent over a decade defending the same man Bradley was now criticizing. "Bradley, I've worked with George for 11 years. I've never once known him to make an unreliable decision. Whatever pulled him away last night was serious enough that he was willing to torch a year of careful planning without hesitation. That should tell you something about how important it was. It tells me he prioritized something over the team that's spent months building his brand strategy," Bradley shot back. "I respect loyalty as much as anyone, Victoria, but there's a business to run here, and decisions have consequences. If this sponsorship falls through, that's real money walking away, money that supports this entire organization, including the people George claims to care so much about." The tension in the room crackled, unresolved, sunlight now streaming fully through the office windows, illuminating dust particles suspended in the air between them. As both perspectives, one rooted in old-school personal loyalty, the other in modern commercial pragmatism, collided without any clear resolution. Neither Bradley nor Victoria yet knew that George himself was, at that very moment, weighing a decision that would render their entire debate almost irrelevant. By early afternoon, Harold had regained enough strength to sit up slightly, propped against pillows, color slowly returning to his weathered face, his voice noticeably less strained than the night before. George sat beside him, having finally stepped out briefly to call Derek and get an update on the chaos unfolding back in LA. The phone call leaving him with a wry, tired amusement rather than genuine worry. They're saying I might lose the sponsorship deal, George said, relaying Derek's report to Harold with a small smile. Bradley's about ready to have a heart attack of his own over it. Harold chuckled weakly, the sound raspy but genuine, a flicker of his old dry humor breaking through. Let me guess, young fella thinks the world runs on contracts and quarterly numbers. Something like that, George said. Every generation's got a few of those, Harold said, pausing to catch his breath before continuing. Nothing wrong with ambition, but a man who can't tell the difference between a good deal and a good deed is gonna have a hard road ahead of him sooner or later. He'll learn, or he won't. George studied the old man for a long moment, the morning light catching the silver stubble along his jaw, then decided the time had come to address what Caleb had told him earlier. Harold, I know about the ranch, about the bank, the note coming due. Harold's expression shifted, embarrassment and pride warring visibly across his weathered features, his hands tightening slightly against the blanket. Wasn't supposed to trouble you with that. That's family business, not something you need to be fixing. Harold, George said firmly, you gave me my whole life. Pulled a string that changed everything, and never once let me carry the weight of owing you for it. Now it's my turn. I'm paying off that note. Today, if I can get the bank on the phone. George, I can't ask you to. You're not asking, George interrupted gently. I'm telling you, that ranch stays in the Weller family. This isn't charity, Harold. This is me finally getting to keep my promise the way it was always meant to be kept. Not just remembering where I came from, but making sure the place that made me who I am doesn't disappear because nobody was willing to show up when it mattered. Harold's eyes glistened, decades of stoic Texas's restraint finally cracking under the weight of the moment, a single tear tracing down through the deep lines of his weathered cheek. You stubborn son of a gun, he whispered, just like I taught you to be. The conversation was interrupted moments later by Ruth returning to the room, freshly showered but still visibly exhausted, followed closely by Caleb, who stopped short upon seeing the emotion evident on both men's faces. What's going on? Ruth asked cautiously, glancing between them. Your father just found out I know about the ranch, George said, and I just told him I'm handling it. Ruth's hand flew to her mouth, tears immediately welling, her knees momentarily unsteady before Caleb reached out to steady her. George, you don't have to, I already decided, George said simply. Consider it done. The room fell into a stunned, grateful silence, broken only by the steady beep of Harold's heart monitor, a sound that, for the first time since George's arrival, felt less like a countdown and more like a rhythm of hope, each beep now marking not fragility, but endurance. That evening, as George stepped outside briefly to catch some fresh air on the hospital's small exterior patio, the concrete still radiating warmth from the day's sun, his phone rang. It was Bradley calling directly for the first time since the crisis began. His name flashing on the screen with a certain hesitancy George could almost feel through the device itself. George, Bradley said, his voice tighter than usual. I need to understand what's happening, because right now I'm fighting to keep a major partnership alive, and I don't have enough information to defend the decision you made last night. George took a slow breath, watching the sun sink low over the flat Texas horizon, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples, a hawk circling lazily somewhere in the distance. Bradley, I understand you've got a job to do, and I respect that, but let me explain something to you that maybe nobody's told you yet in this business. Reputation built on reliability to industry partners is valuable, sure. But reputation built on being the kind of man who shows up for the people who believed in you before anybody else did, that's the reputation that actually matters, long after the sponsorship deals and the trophies are forgotten. There was a long pause on the line before Bradley spoke again, his tone noticeably softer, some of the earlier edge dissolving. The man you left everything for last night, who is he really? He's the reason I have a career at all, George said simply. And right now he needs me more than any stage ever will. Bradley was quiet for a moment longer, something shifting in his understanding. the silence stretching just long enough to feel meaningful. "I'll handle the sponsorship conversation," he said finally. "Do what you need to do out there, George. I think I finally understand a little better." As George hung up the phone and turned back toward the hospital entrance, the automatic doors sliding open with a soft hiss, he felt, for the first time since the chaos of the red carpet the night before, a settling clarity about the choice he'd made, a choice that had cost him. The choice he'd made, a choice that had cost him headlines, speculation, and possibly a lucrative deal, but had given him something far more valuable in return. The chance to finally repay a debt that had shaped the entire trajectory of his life at the exact moment it mattered most. Inside, Harold's condition remained fragile, the coming hours still uncertain. But for the first time, hope had settled quietly into the room alongside the machines and monitors. Hope built not on miracles, but on the simple human decision of one man choosing loyalty over legacy, and finding that the two were never as separate as Hollywood had led him to believe. 3 days passed at Palo Pinto Regional Hospital, each one marked by small, cautious victories, the kind of slow, incremental progress that felt almost imperceptible hour to hour, but undeniable when measured against where things had stood that first terrifying night. Harold's heart stabilized enough for the doctors to speak, for the first time, in terms of weeks rather than hours, their clinical language softening ever so slightly with each morning's rounds. George stayed the entire time, sleeping in uncomfortable waiting room chairs that left a permanent ache in his lower back, eating vending machine sandwiches that tasted like cardboard, and fielding a steady stream of calls from Derek and Victoria, managing the storm still churning back in Los Angeles. He didn't care about any of it the way he once might have. What mattered was the sound of Harold's voice growing stronger each day, the color slowly returning to his face, the stubborn Texas will to live reasserting itself hour by hour. Visible in small ways, a firmer grip on his hand, a longer stretch of coherent conversation, an appetite finally returning for the bland hospital broth he complained about with genuine relish. On the fourth morning, sunlight streaming through the window, in a way that felt almost deliberately hopeful, Dr. Hensley delivered news that finally allowed everyone in the room to breathe freely for the first time since George's arrival. "He's not out of the woods," she said carefully, flipping through the chart in her hands, "but he's stable enough to move to a step-down unit. Barring complications, I think we're looking at recovery, not decline. It'll be a long road, but he's fighting hard." Ruth wept openly in the hallway, gripping Caleb's arm as the weight of days of fear finally lifted, her shoulders shaking with the particular release that comes after prolonged dread finally breaks into relief. Inside the room, Harold sat propped against his pillows, noticeably stronger, giving George a look that carried decades of unspoken understanding. "Guess I'm not done just yet," Harold said, voice still rough but steadier than it had been days earlier, a faint glint of his old stubbornness returning to his eyes. "Wouldn't have expected anything less," George replied, settling into the chair beside him one more time, the same chair that had become almost a fixture of his own body over the past several days. "You're too stubborn to let a bad heart have the last word." Harold chuckled, the sound still weak but genuine, then grew serious, his expression shifting into something more contemplative. "You know, son, I've been lying here thinking about what you did, walking out on that fancy award show. World's gonna remember that for a long time, one way or another. Some folks gonna call it foolish, others gonna understand. Let them think whatever they want," George said. "I know what mattered that night, and it wasn't sitting in a velvet chair waiting for my name to get called. Back in Nashville, the sponsorship situation resolved itself in a way nobody quite expected. Bradley Foster presented the partnership executives with a revised pitch, one that reframed George's absence not as unreliability, but as a defining moment of authentic character. Precisely the kind of story that resonated with country music's core values of loyalty, family, and rural roots. He'd spent 2 sleepless nights rewriting the deck, pulling old photographs of George's early career, weaving in details of Harold's ranch that Derek had reluctantly shared. To Bradley's surprise, the sponsorship partners responded enthusiastically once the full story became public. Far from damaging the brand relationship, George's choice to prioritize an old promise over Hollywood glamour became the centerpiece of a reworked campaign, one built around authenticity rather than staged spectacle. Bradley called Derek personally to share the news, standing at his office window overlooking downtown Nashville, his tone carrying a new humility that hadn't been there a week earlier. "I owe you an apology," Bradley admitted, his voice quieter than usual. "I was so focused on protecting the deal, I almost missed what actually made George worth partnering with in the first place. Turns out the loyalty wasn't the liability. It was the whole point." "Took you long enough to figure that out," Derek said, though not unkindly, a faint smile audible in his voice. "But better late than never." The Academy of Country Music, for its part, quietly arranged to present George with his Lifetime Achievement Award in a smaller, private ceremony once he returned to Nashville, a gesture that felt, to George, far more meaningful than the glittering spectacle he'd walked away from at the Shrine Auditorium. Held instead in a modest banquet room, with no cameras beyond a single photographer documenting the moment for the Academy's own archives. 2 weeks later, George stood on the porch of Harold's ranch house, the wood creaking familiarly beneath his boots, watching the old rancher slowly making his way across the yard with the cane. Caleb hovering nearby just in case, though Harold waved off any assistance with characteristic stubbornness, muttering something about not needing a babysitter at his age. The banknote had been paid in full, the ranch secured for at least another generation, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across 400 acres of land that had shaped Georgia's entire understanding of what it meant to be a man of his word. Cicadas hummed steadily in the surrounding fields, and somewhere off toward the barn, a dog barked twice before settling back into the shade. Ruth joined George on the porch, handing him a glass of sweet tea, condensation already beating on the outside of the glass, the same ritual that had marked countless afternoons decades earlier. "I still can't quite believe you did all this," she said. "The hospital bills, the ranch, all of it. Dad keeps saying he doesn't deserve it." "He's wrong about that," George said, watching Harold pause to examine a fence post with the same careful attention he'd once taught a broke. Directionless kid to bring to every task, no matter how small. "Some debts aren't about money, Ruth. They're about who you become because somebody believed in you before you believed in yourself. I spent 40 years thinking I owed your father a debt of gratitude. Turns out I owed him a debt of character. Money's just the easiest part to pay back." Caleb approached the porch, having finished helping his grandfather settle into a chair near the fence line, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. He looked at George with an expression far different from the guarded skepticism of that first night in the hospital hallway. "For what it's worth," Caleb said, leaning against the porch railing, "I get it now. What you gave up that night. I was pretty hard on you, wondering if it was worth it. And now?" George asked. "Now I think it was probably the most honest thing I've ever watched somebody do," Caleb admitted, glancing out toward his grandfather in the distance. "Everybody talks about legacy like it's about how many awards you win, how big your name gets. But watching you these past 2 weeks, I think legacy's actually about who shows up when it matters, and who doesn't. Grandpa always said character's what you do when nobody's grading you on it." George smiled, raising his glass slightly in Harold's direction as the old man settled into his porch chair, gazing out over land that had nearly slipped away, now secure for years to come. "Your grandfather taught me that lesson 43 years ago on a hay bale, mending fences I didn't know how to mend. Glad to see it stuck with more than just me." As the sun began its slow descent over the Texas horizon, painting the ranch in warm amber light, George Strait sat quietly among people who understood, better than any Hollywood audience ever could, that the truest measure of a man wasn't found in trophies collecting dust on a shelf, but in the promises he kept when keeping them cost him everything the world said mattered most. Months later, footage of George's private ceremony would circulate quietly online, framed not around the mist-red carpet, but around a single quote he gave in a rare interview. "I've been given plenty of awards in my life, but the greatest honor I ever received was a chance decades ago, from a man who believed in me when I had nothing to offer back, and the greatest privilege of my life was finally getting to return the favor when it mattered most." The story of that night, the empty seat at the Shrine Auditorium, the unclaimed trophy, and the quiet drive through the Texas dark toward a dying man's bedside would become, in time, not a footnote in George Strait's illustrious career, but perhaps its truest chapter, the one that had nothing to do with music at all, and everything to do with the kind of man decades of stardom had never managed to change.